the German Foreign Office as a consultant and consular protocol officer in Bonn in Portugal in the 1990s. He was the head of the economic department at the German embassy in Saudi Arabia and also consultant for Eastern Europe, Russia and the CIS in the economic department of the Foreign Office in Berlin. He's also been deputy head of the German-French Cultural Relations Department and head of the German Schools Abroad section of the Cultural Department of the German Foreign Office. And then he was made deputy head of mission of the German embassy in Austria, as well as he's also, before his appointment here in New Zealand, he was ambassador and head of the permanent representation of the Federal Republic of Germany to UNESCO in Paris. And so we have been very lucky to have him in New Zealand, as I said already, since August 2019. So please join me in welcoming the ambassador.
Thank you very much. Kia ora, good afternoon, guten Tag, and thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you, Martin Holland, for organizing this. And I'm very happy and I'm privileged. I'm glad to be here. I should have been here already shortly after my arrival in Aotearoa, New Zealand in 2019, but you all know why this was not anymore possible last year. And now finally I'm happy to be here for many reasons. One of the reasons is the name of the chair of Martin Holland, Jean Monnet, because Jean Monnet is very much speaking to me and my own history and my family history, being born in Luxembourg, because my father worked at the very nucleus of the European Union of coal and steel, and I will come back to this later in my presentation, a presentation which should not be a classical lecture about a specific, given, maybe boring political theme, but I would like to invite you to accompany me through some of my experiences in a 35 years long-lasting diplomatic career, personal life, sharing some of the conclusions of this personal and diplomatic life. And when I was thinking about what could be the overall topic or the red thread of this lecture, of this sharing of experiences, I thought it could be, and this is the title I would like to give to this lecture, is change of perspective. Why change of perspective? A diplomat, of course, has always to do a change of perspective. He has to share and to transport and to report the perspective of his or her host country back home, and to transport and to share the perspective of my own country with my host country. And change of perspective is an overall, everlasting, evergreen theme for all of our lives, for your life, for the life of mankind, with one specific aspect, the perspective of who is old and young. You are young, of course, no doubt. I'm not young anymore, no doubt. And you would consider, of course, somebody with the age of 30 to be old, but during life, the barrier of what you would consider to be old is pushed back further and further. And I will come back to this later as well. And when thinking about this change of perspective and the aspect of old or young, I found a very, very nice quote I had heard a couple of time ago. I don't know how speaking this will be to you, but somebody of a certain age said, "The older I grow, the more strange and bizarre the others become." I don't know how speaking is this for you. Maybe in your age you would more refer what I have also heard and lived by myself. Puberty is when the parents become difficult. So on this happy note, I would like to share with you my latest great, amazing change of perspective. This was when I arrived in New Zealand, in Aotearoa, New Zealand, in August 2019 with my wife on 1st of August. I lived a dramatic change of perspective regarding what kind of world map am I looking at. All of a sudden, I had to say goodbye to the Atlantic-centered world map, which is in our European DNA, and to shift to a new world map with the big blue Pacific and the Pacific Island states and Australia and New Zealand in the middle and the rest of the world around. And I was happy to see all these small Pacific Island states, which some of them are part of my competence as a non-resident ambassador to 6 Pacific Island states. I remembered to have learned and practiced and discussed a lot in my previous posting at UNESCO in Paris about SIDS, small island developing states. And when I made in Paris my farewell tour to other delegations of also Pacific Island states, one representative told me, no, Stefan, we don't want to be called small islands developing states. We are blue or big ocean sustainable states. A change of perspective, which I found very interesting, and I'm always using when meeting with leaders from the Pacific Island states. By the way, the abbreviation is much better, not SIDS, but BOSS, big or blue ocean sustainable states. I was very happy and proud to be in Aotearoa, New Zealand, which is such a popular place for Germans and German tourists. You will see how this perspective has changed a little bit. I was very and still am very proud of having 6 Pacific Island states in the competence of the German Embassy in Wellington, which are Tuvalu, Fiji, Cook Island, Tonga, Kiribati and Samoa. All of them together with New Zealand would cover on the globe in this new world map, would cover on the globe not via surface but on the globe a surface bigger than the whole of Europe. No other German ambassador has such a big area of competence, and you will see how this perspective has changed a little bit later onwards. On our arrival in Wellington on the 1st of August 2019, my wife and I, we also noticed that the time difference between Europe and New Zealand is not 12 hours, but 6 months. Arriving here in wintertime, I really wasn't completely prepared. I had such a busy time in Paris before, participating in the yearly World Heritage Committee meeting of UNESCO in Azerbaijan with 3,000 participants, not anymore possible like this. Coming back to Paris the next day, the moving company would be in our apartment, and I worked until the last day, Friday, Saturday in the plane, and coming here in the winter. And I don't know if you have heard about this fantastic cartoon movies Life Swap. Have you heard about Life Swap? It's a tandem of a young New Zealander and a young German producing up to now 5 to 7 minutes video clips about a young Kiwi being a student in Germany and a young German being a student in New Zealand and exchanging the experiences on the daily basis via Zoom. You can look these video clips online, Live Swap, to swap lives. And this is also a change of perspective. And my favorite episode of Live Swap, you should really look at this. My favorite episode is Winter Deniers. Because we were desperately looking at this evening of 1st of August, where on earth is the central heating in our temporary apartment? And we found out an electric heating only next day in the cupboard, and we at once asked for another 2 ones. So this is also part of change of perspective. And the other day, I want to share this with you. I was sitting next to a young Kiwi with Maori descendants, and we were discussing temperature, and we were discussing has he ever been to the Pacific Islands, and I was so amazed to hear his answer on my question, have you ever been to the Pacific Islands? He said, no, why? Too hot. Maybe then you would also like another anecdote I would like to share with you. On our last holiday, we were by car in the southern island as far as Invercargill. I don't know if this you would consider to be the most attractive tourist place in New Zealand. And it was a terrible weather, and it was raining and a mist and cold. And when I was going out the next day from our accommodation, there was a car parking next to me, and the Kiwi would go out of the car in shorts and in short sleeves. And he must have seen my desperate mood. And he said, "Oh, another beautiful day in paradise." And this is really fantastic, and I always quote this. So when I arrived in New Zealand on the 1st of August, I thought after all this stress in Paris, I would have a somewhat quieter time. But this was wishful thinking. In the first week in Wellington, I had to look for a suitable place to host the National Day reception for October, because everything was already booked by my predecessor, but we had to cancel because an official visitor, the Deputy Speaker of the Parliament, was coming on the very 3rd of October, the day of German reunification. We had to cancel, but we had booked for mid of October, and we had to visit 12 different locations in Wellington to find a suitable place. What we found. In the second week, I was traveling to Tuvalu. Have you ever been to Tuvalu? No wonder, because I've learned Tuvalu is the least visited place of the world, but was hosting the yearly Pacific Island Leader Forum. And via Fiji, I went to Tuvalu and back. It was a journey of 7 legs to fly, and a big adventure. And I learned in Tuvalu not only many other Pacific counterparts and leaders, and I learned a lot about how the view and the perspective of the Pacific Islands is. I always remember the big poster when you arrive at Funafuti International Airport: "Save Tuvalu, save the world." So I have understood by being there and discussing the issues that if the rise of the sea level would menace Kiribati with only 1.5 meters above sea level, or Tuvalu with 4.5 meters above sea level, those countries would not be the ones to have only a problem. We would have a problem all over the world. And this was a great lesson. And up to now, I was not able to go back to Tuvalu anymore for the reasons you know. In my third week, I had a prefixed appointment with the Governor General of New Zealand to hand over my official letter as an ambassador. Otherwise, without handing over this official letter, you are not a full-fledged ambassador. And the next day was another given appointment for a flight back to Germany over the whole globe for the yearly Ambassadors Conference. When coming back to New Zealand, I thought, so maybe now a bit a quieter time. I will jump a little bit. I will just mention the volcano eruption on beginning of December, where we had also Germans being severely wounded and one died later. Then beginning of next year we had official delegations, another Deputy Speaker of the Parliament who came to New Zealand and was sitting at this table and discussing with representatives of the university. The week after I went to Samoa, the first official trip, and I thought maybe now will come a somewhat quieter time. But you know what happened. And I would like to refer a little bit to this because it was exactly a year ago. A year ago, where we would think it's ages ago. Already in May last year, I thought beginning of 2020 is ages ago. So would you remember? For me, I would like to mention here in Christchurch, everything started in Christchurch with the first year commemoration service for the Christchurch mosque attacks, which was scheduled for Sunday, the 15th of March. And every ambassador had already the ticket to go to Christchurch. Many of them, especially from the Muslim states, were already here in Christchurch. And all of a sudden, Saturday afternoon, the 14th of March, the service was cancelled. This meant to me having my last quiet Sunday in Wellington, and the next week everything from day to day really became dramatic. The 20th of March, border closure. The 24th of March, the German embassy signed an agreement with Air New Zealand on repatriation flights. The 25th, state of emergency. The 26th, lockdown. The 27th, ban on repatriation flights. I will never forget the dramatic first repatriation flight from Lufthansa, which was scheduled for the 27th, then for the 26th, then was postponed to the 27th, then was cancelled, and when we woke up the next day, we learned it is already on the way to not Christchurch, but Auckland. And this was really incredible because nobody knew would it be allowed to land in spite of the ban on repatriation flights. Would it be allowed to take some German tourists who were stranded, or especially vulnerable people? Would maybe thousands of Germans storm the airport of Auckland, or would it go in an orderly manner? Nobody knew. It was like Apollo 11. There was no blueprint for this. Would you guess how many German tourists were stranded? Please give me a guess.
1,000.
1,000. 10,000. So this was a change of perspective. All of a sudden I was not anymore proud to be in a place so popular for so many tourists. So to repatriate 10,000 of German tourists stranded in spite of the ban on repatriation flights was really an incredible task and adventure. So to cut the long story short, this first Lufthansa flight was allowed to land, was allowed to take passengers, was allowed to take off. With more passengers this kind of Airbus ever has taken, I learned the term of jump seats. I didn't know what was a jump seat. Every jump seat was with a passenger, children on the knees of the parents. 14 passengers more than normally were allowed for this flight, but then game over, no flight anymore. And after a week of incredible pressure for everybody, for my government, for the government of other countries where tourists were stranded, New Zealand government, etc., there was a lift on ban on repatriation flights who could resume. And then we had altogether 26 flights, 14 chartered by us from Lufthansa, 12 chartered by the German embassy for New Zealand, taking off either here in Christchurch or in Auckland. I will never forget the last Lufthansa flight which left Christchurch on the 12th of March, Easter Sunday, here in Christchurch. And the Lufthansa pilot had a fantastic reflex in front of the New Zealand cameras to rebaptize that flight in city of Christchurch. This went around the globe and around New Zealand. And then the low flights of I don't know if you have seen the low flights of the Lufthansa flights over Christchurch back home for a long haul flight. Lufthansa normally never does. Then I went to Auckland on Easter Monday, the next day to be present at the last Lufthansa flight which left Auckland. And I never forgot these moments sitting at the evening in the cockpit of this Airbus and looking at all these lights and all the discussions to prepare this flight. And I want to share this anecdote with you. When I then listened to the pilot, and he had a discussion with the tower saying that never his aircraft had such a long-haul flight with so many passengers, and he would need another 5,000 or so liters of kerosene. Okay, then he ordered another 5,000 liters of kerosene. This would take another 30 or 40 minutes. And then he said to the tower, "Would you please give me another slot?" And the answer of the tower was, "You can have every slot you like because you're the only flight tonight." So this was about the repatriation a year ago exactly, for 10,000 German tourists and a lot of European tourists we took on our flights back home. Another story was the repatriation of only 300, but much more difficult case, 300 German tourists stranded on the Pacific Islands. So from the European perspective, New Zealand is the end of the world. But there is even something behind the end of the world, which is the Pacific, like the dark side of the moon, totally inaccessible, with every flight connection cancelled. And then we had 3 repatriation flights with 13 countries, 13 legs altogether, touching 10 different countries at a time where I was not at all anymore so happy and proud to have a competence for so many countries. Change of perspective. I would have wished it would have been less countries. In cooperation with the embassies in Australia, the European delegation in Suva, many high commissioners in those countries to bring those 300 Germans back home. And we calculated if we would have taken so much time for the 10,000 German tourists in New Zealand as we had to invest time for the 300 Germans in the Pacific Islands, it would have worked 2 years to bring the Germans back from New Zealand. Altogether, we transported them 180 million kilometers. Our homepage was hit, I think, 2 million times. We had to answer 10,000s of emails. This was a big, big story in a posting where I thought I would have a little bit quiet time. I will now make a big jump back to the past, to the 50s, maybe a bit more to the core of what you are expecting me to talk about Europe, to the very beginning of the European Union, the birth of the European Union, and 2 names you are hopefully familiar with, Jean Monnet and Robert Schuman. Why? Because Jean Monnet, who was a Frenchman who had never a political posting, a very influential businessman, was part of the generation who had lived 2 devastating world wars in 1 generation only, who has witnessed the terrible German-French enmity, which was one of the main reasons of the wars. And he thought, what can we do to break the vicious circle of war, revenge for the revenge war, knowing that the peace treaties may sometimes not be worth the paper they are written on. And he had unprecedented, great, brilliant, ingenious idea nobody has had before him. This was to merge the production of the 2 main things which at that time were at the core of making war, to merge the production of coal and steel of Germany and France. And the second great unprecedented idea was to create a supranational international organization to administer this merged production of coal and steel, and to join maybe other countries, which was then the case with Italy and Benelux, Belgium, Luxembourg and the Netherlands, to this new institution. The only problem he had to look for somebody who was more popular and influential than himself to voice this idea, to be sure that it would be a success. And he found this person in the French Minister of Foreign Affairs of this time, Robert Schuman, who, important detail, I will come back to this later, was born in Luxembourg. And Robert Schuman voiced this idea on a very suitable occasion on the 9th May of 1950, which has become, for this very reason, the birthday of the European Union. And Jean Monnet was then the head of this new international organization, the High Authority of the European Union for Coal and Steel. And in this capacity, he was the very first predecessor of what we know now, the head of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, or her immediate predecessor, Claude Juncker. This was a big bang at the birthday of the European Union, which, to cut a long story short, was then added to have two brothers and sisters with the European Union for Economy, the European Union for Nuclear Research. Then those three institutions merged to the European Community. The institution merged and went from Luxembourg. Most of them went to Brussels. And Luxembourg is important for the point of view of change of perspective. Why on earth this first European institution was based in Luxembourg and not in France and not in Germany? Because both countries were fighting and both wanted to have the headquarters of this new institution. And then Luxembourg, I don't know how familiar you are with the geography, is a bit squeezed between Germany and France and also Belgium, squeezed geographically, historically, culturally, and also language-wise. I'm not a Luxembourger, I have only a German passport, but I was born in Luxembourg. And Luxembourg, due to this specific historical position, was much more able, and still is much more able, to make the change of perspective and to be the mediator and to interpret both positions. Every Luxembourger is perfectly, not only in his local Luxembourg language, but also in French and German. And this is one of the reasons why the headquarters was first in Luxembourg, and still many institutions, as you will learn or have learned, are still in Luxembourg. Then in 1973, the UK joined the European institution and the European Union, and I still remember very well how incredibly happy the generation of my parents were when the UK joined the European Union. Finally, also the UK is part of this family. Change of perspective. I have learned here that your shock is not the Brexit, like it's our shock, but your shock in New Zealand was when the UK joined the European Union and you lost the privileged access, the privileged partnership, the privileged trade partnership to the UK. Change of perspective. I just want to make the footnote that even my generation has the tendency to forget that only a couple of years before Spain, Portugal, Greece joined the European Union family, these were dictatorships, with Franco, the most known dictator, Salazar, maybe less known, and the military junta in Greece. So this is also an achievement of the European Union to have those democratic countries in our family, in a way that we forget, our tendency to forget this aspect of the past. You know that then the European Union European Community got more political competence, is now the European Union with a lot of political competence, the Parliament, which is elected directly. I will not talk too much about that, but I would like to mention the other big bang for the European Union, and this term was found for the first time in 2004 when 10 countries joined the European Union, especially 8 from the former Eastern Europe. And this is also something I would really like to underline and to make another reference to change of perspective, because many or some people at that time said, well, all those countries from Eastern Europe, are they really supposed to join the European Union? And 2 years later, also Romania and Bulgaria. So all the countries from the former Soviet bloc joined the European Union. And our famous Minister of Foreign Affairs, the most famous one, Hans-Dietrich Genscher, said this fantastic sentence: those countries from the former Eastern European communistic bloc were only politically in the East. Geographically, they are in the middle of Europe, and culturally wise, they have always been in the West. And this is a very moving, true sentence, and shows a specific way of change of perspective. So to sum up, Europe, which is a great success story, an incredible, unprecedented success story of peace. We had no wars anymore in Europe, except the military conflict in the Balkans Cyprus and Ukraine, but that's not an overall European or World War conflict. If you would draw a red line on the map, or a black line, on the map of Europe, where in the last 1,500 years a border was contested, except with the exception of some places, the whole map of Europe would be black. So the European Union is a peace project and an incredible success story. And somebody said the European Union is the answer to the wars of the 19th and 20th century. And Jean Monnet and Churchill are supposed having said, better is to discuss or to have disputes at the negotiation table in Brussels than to shoot at each other. And the very best quote I would like to share with you comes again from somebody from Luxembourg. It's not a coincidence, Claude Juncker, who said what you will certainly remember, Martin: whoever does not believe anymore in Europe, who doubts Europe, who would even despair of Europe, should visit the military cemeteries. So my personal conclusion I would like to share with you is the root of all evil, if we look at the European wars and conflicts, are two things: intolerance and fanatism. Intolerance and fanatism also because people haven't had the chance or didn't practice change of perspective. I would even add two other aspects: humiliation of the opponent or the defeated enemy, and maximum requirements or claims. This is my personal conclusion of my diplomatic life and looking at the history of Europe. And Angela Merkel had another fantastic sentence she said a couple of years ago: there is a quite simple way to the soul of Europe, to tolerance. One has to see with the eyes of the others. This is the core of change of perspective.